As the coronavirus has had a devastating impact on the global economy, there are growing tensions between the United States and China, which include China's handling of the COVID-19 outbreak at the onset, in addition to a trade deal. Carolee McGrath spoke with retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Gary Lefort, Professor Emeritus at American International College, to learn more.
In the Phase 1 deal, China agreed to buy up to $200 billion worth of U.S. Goods above the 2017 baseline. In the first year, this $200 billion was over a 2-year period. In the first year, this year, $77 billion would be purchased, and next year, $123 billion. China also agreed that it would tighten its protection of U.S. intellectual property rights. The U.S. in return agreed that it would not remove the tariffs on the $250 billion that was already in place. There was $160 billion later that was imposed that would be reduced from roughly 15% to about 7.5%. And also the U.S. would suspend the $160 billion that was supposed to be enacted in September 2019. So it really was a win-win situation for all parties concerned.
Do you think China will be able to keep their end of the deal of that $200 billion in products and services from the U.S., given the current economic crisis that the world is facing?
On last Thursday, May 7th, both the United States and China had a phone call that discussed that very thing, where both sides going to try to live up to the deal. And China has indicated that, yes, it wants to do that. They did agree that they were behind in meeting the timetable for the first year, but part of that is contributed to the fact that they're just coming out of the coronavirus in their own country as well. But it looks like at the present moment that both countries are agreeing to move forward.
In the midst of all of this, of course, we have the coronavirus, a lot of news and discussion about China's handling of all of this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, if you really look at it, it's been kind of a phased approach as far as the United States goes. You know, in the November, December, January timeframe, when it first came out that the virus had hit China, the U.S. President Trump was very supportive of the actions that China had taken, especially in trying to contain it. But as we got into the February, March, and April timeframe, and more information became available about the virus and how it started, it became evident that maybe China had not been as transparent as it should have been as far as disclosing it, especially as far as how the virus is transmitted in terms of human to human contact. And also the fact that China probably should have been much more proactive in not allowing Chinese to travel to other parts of the world. Take, for example, the United States, or even a better example would be Italy, because that really accelerated the pandemic.
The United States is also pushing the European Union to back an international investigation into their handling. Do you think the European Union will go along with that?
It's a mixed bag. France so far has taken the attitude that they want a slower approach to the situation. The UK has been much more responsive. I think in the case of probably Italy and Spain, that's been heavily hit by the virus, that they would be more supportive. I think the big concern is that the international community is recognizing the fact that they have been over-reliant on China as far as medical and pharmaceutical products go.
Let's talk a little bit about that, about the manufacturing and the supply chains coming from China. I know ventilators, those components made in China, ibuprofen. How will that change? And I know that some U.S. companies prior to had been considering or had been leaving China. How do you think all of this is going to either accelerate that or change that?
Oh, I think it's going to accelerate it. Not only has Trump recognized that has been an Achilles heels with the United States. Matter of fact, that was one of his campaign platforms, is that the United States was way too reliant on China for a number of products, especially medical and pharmaceutical. I think you're also going to find that both the House and the Senate are going to initiate their own actions as well, as far as bringing manufacturing back to the United States.
Now, there's also tensions in the South China Sea as well as this is all occurring?
That's right. It kind of seems like China may have, in fact, taken advantage of the virus situation around the world, especially in the United States. China has always taken the position that the South China Sea is really a territorial responsibility of China, certainly not the United States. So they have been building islands in the South China Sea, mobilizing or fortifying them with military installation and air defense missiles. And the United States strongly objects to that because that's international waters. And so just this past month in April, there was 2 actions on the part of the U.S. Navy to show freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. One took place on April 28th in the Paracel Island area. The second took place on April 29th in the Spratly Island area. So the United States has been very, very firm about its commitment to keep that the South China Sea open.
So in addition to all of this, you also have the U.S. Taipei Act, which was passed at the end of March. Can you explain that and the impact that will have?
Yeah, that's really a very, very important initiative for Taiwan. Taiwan basically lost its seat in the United Nations when China joined in 2001. So it's kind of a country without a country. And China has always considered Taiwan as a maverick province of the People's Republic of China. The United States doesn't agree with that. And this act, which the president signed off on March 26th of this year, basically is an effort to help Taiwan improve its diplomatic and economic situation around the world. One of the key features of the act is that it's designed to endorse a free trade agreement between the United States and Taiwan. So for Taiwan is a very, very important initiative in trying to be internationally recognized. Obviously, China is not very happy with it because they see Taiwan as part of the People's Republic of China.
Because of this act and the tensions in the South China Sea and obviously the coronavirus, where do you think the U.S. goes from here as far as relations? Obviously, those relations are tense. There was a movement made by the trade deal in January, but how do you think this is all going to unfold in the months to come?
In the White House, there's kind of 2 camps. One is a punitive camp that sort of wants to take punitive action against China, like, for example, eliminating the trade deal or even imposing greater deals, taking away China's sovereignty immunity, which means it could be prosecuted in court for damages caused here in the United States. And then there's another group that says, geez, we need to be much more cautious. We need the trade deal. Looking into the future, the United States is going to need the help of China, especially as far as medical supplies goes, or pharmaceuticals go. What happens if China ends up developing a vaccine first? And so far, indications are that Trump is sort of leaning towards the more cautious approach, which I think is the right approach at this present time.